Time. Oh, baby! Have we got a show for you tonight? I'm really excited because I'm going to get a chance to return from whence I came, and that is a place called Sudbury, Ontario. We're going to be talking about ghost stories, UFO sightings, Bigfoot, First Nation legends, all kinds of lore surrounding this great northern city that's called Sudbury. Now, let me start off 2 billion, with a B, years ago. The Earth is brand new. It's bubbling everywhere. You got the picture, folks? And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a huge meteorite slams and rocks the Earth. And that slams right in the center of Sudbury, Ontario. Now, all the minerals that are contained in this huge, huge meteorite create what's called the Nickel Basin. And this has sustained Canada, I would argue, and it has sustained Sudbury throughout the years with mining. Now, just let me give you this one little tidbit. I'm going to bring it back to the Cold War. Sudbury was so important to the economic status of Canada that the Russians had slated Sudbury as number 8 on the hit list for Canada. So there you go. Now, it's full of mines, intercrossing, interweaving all under the city, under the lakes up there. It's a beautiful spot. It would be approximately 4 hours north with the new highway, 3.5, with an airplane less than 20 minutes. Dog sled's a different story, folks. But you're getting the idea. It's a wonderful city, and that's where I started this show, Night Fright. I had moved there several years ago. And a little memo came around from Laurentian University, which is the local university there, asking for hosts to host the show. And I thought, why not a paranormal conspiracy show? And as we all know, the rest is history. It took off. It is now the #1 rated show in Canada of its genre. And that's all due to you folks that are listening right around the world, not just in Canada. Oh, baby, is this going to be a great one tonight. One of my favorite guys in all the world is joining me tonight. His name is Mark Leslie. Fans of this show will remember I had him on about 1.5 years ago, maybe a year. He had written a book called Haunted Hamilton, which is Steeltown, Canada, folks, for those of you that are unaware. Hamilton is 1.5 hours south of Toronto. So we're going to take you back up north to Sudbury, deep in the mines in the dark, with Mark Leslie tonight. Mark, welcome back to the show, buddy. Thanks for joining us.
It's great to be frightened at night with you again, Brent.
And, folks, all I can say is that Mark and I have a bit of a history here. We've spent several nights together deep in the bowels of Laurentian University with Night Fright. And if you really want to get scared, you know, that's the place to be. Turn out your lights tonight, folks. Settle in, get a coffee going, get a tea going, get a beverage of your choice going. A great time is going to be had tonight. I want you to settle in. Relax. This is your time to put your feet up. Get a nice cocoa going, something nice and warm. Treat yourself for the next 2 hours. Get the lights out, because we're going to talk ghost stories tonight. Oh, baby, here we go. Let's go back to Mark. Mark, now, can you give a little bit of a brief history? I started off a little bit of how creepy and how spooky Sudbury actually is. Once you get past the outer rim, if you will, of what people see on a day-to-day basis. I mean, we've got all these mines running, crisscrossing everywhere under the city. Some say there is hundreds of miles of mines, and people haven't seen the extent of what's going on under this city. Can you give a little bit of a brief background of Sudbury and the creepiness that's associated with it?
Yeah, of course. I mean, you set it up perfectly. I mean, you go back in time to see how the Sudbury, the basin of Sudbury was formed, the meteorite strike, you know, the huge nickel deposits in the area. And when you talk about the mines, when you talk about the hidden underground tunnels that are completely not visible at all to the surface, but there's incredible activity going on underneath. That's the perfect way to think about a city such as Sudbury. Sudbury has a reputation, and as the mining community, in mid-North Ontario. There's stories about NASA sending astronauts up to Sudbury just before they were going to the moon so they could get a sense of what the moon's surface would be like. And this was due to, in that time period, we're looking at, the 60s, we're looking at Sudbury because of the strip mining, because of the, they didn't yet have the super stack there, which is a huge smokestack that actually sends the residue from the smelter away from the city. There was a lot of green that was destroyed, and so there's a lot of rock formations that were at the time very, very prevalent for Sudbury. Mm-hmm. Not so today, but there's still that mystique. There's still that background for the city. So the city sort of has a little bit of a persona as that mining community. But the interesting thing about Sudbury is when you dig into the surface, just like there are ghost stories associated with various historical buildings, like the Bell Mansion, etc., the St. Joseph's Hospital, there's a culture and an arts community in Sudbury. And Brent, I know because you've lived there, you've experienced that yourself. There's incredible talent coming from the Sudbury community. And I'm not just talking about NHL hockey players, of which Sudbury has a pretty high ratio. I'm not just talking about world-class athletes competing in the Olympics in skiing. I'm not just talking about the incredible ice fishing and fishing and things that you can do, but I'm talking about the Sudbury Theatre Centre, another haunted building, and I'm talking about the arts community in Sudbury, which is really incredibly dynamic and diverse, and like the hidden mine systems underground, are not readily visible when you look at the stereotypical vision of the city.
Folks, we're speaking with Mark Leslie tonight. He's got a book out called Spooky Sudbury. Easy way to get the book, as always, folks. www.nightfrightshow.com. Just click on tonight's guest book cover, and that'll take you right to a spot where you can order the book, as always, from the comfort of your own home. Now, I've got to ask everybody, go get a pen, because I'm going to give you some numbers and a Skype address so you can call in and tell us your ghost stories as well as UFO stories. And we're doing Bigfoot tonight too, folks. Now, you see, Sudbury is further up north, and there's a large community of First Nations people. Those folks in the States, American Indians, we call them First Nations because they were here first. And the lore that is surrounding them is astronomical. As a matter of fact, this place, Sudbury, has, I would say, 7 different lakes just in its immediate region. I mean, there's a lake in the middle of the city. How great is that? And I remember when I was living there, within 5 minutes you could be at the beach for supper after work. It was just a terrific, terrific spot. Also, it is a hub for UFO activity, and we're going to be getting into that as well tonight, so stick with us, because we're going to allow this to evolve very slowly, but we're going to creep you out tonight with some great old-fashioned ghost stories. And as I always say, folks, I get ghost stories from around the world emailed to me every single day, and I always say the same thing. If it takes the world sitting around a campfire telling ghost stories not to get us to stop shooting each other's butts off, then so be it. And tonight's a good night for that. Hope you've got a nice beverage going. Let's tell a ghost story, Mark, okay?
Of course. It's funny you talk about Sudbury is the world's largest freshwater lake in a downtown core, and that's Ramsey.
That's right.
And I used to work in tourism in Sudbury, so I know a lot about the special events. But one thing I did not know when I worked for Rainbow Country Travel Association in Sudbury, I did not know how many places in Sudbury were haunted. It was quite amazing. I think I mentioned the Sudbury Theatre Centre.
Yes, sir.
And I think I would be remiss not to talk about Sidney Brown, who is the actor who's no longer with us in his mortal coil, but he is with us and with the theater in the afterlife. And Sidney was an actor working on a play at the Sudbury Theatre Centre, and he was really committed to his craft. He was dedicated, he was passionate, he was really looking forward to the play, and unfortunately he died before the play went live. They were still in rehearsal phase. But what started to happen was props would be missing. Things would get moved. Strange noises, strange bumps would be heard when the actors were there in the theater, and it's dark, and they're by themselves, and lots of mischievous things seem to have happened. And the actors got in the habit of saying, "Oh, that's just Sid." Sid, liked to play jokes on us like that. Sid was there. And so now it's become, in a lot of theaters, you don't say the word Macbeth.
That's right.
The play has associated with death and tragedy and dying. And when you are in a theater, and I have worked in a theater at Carleton University for years, you say that Scottish play. You never say Macbeth. And there's a ritual that if you say Macbeth, you have to do this ritual just to get the negative vibe away from the production. And the same way that, the Macbeth and that Scottish play are ritualized around theater, at the Sudbury Theater Center, often actors, when they walk in, when they first set foot into the theater center, the same way that when you're learning a martial art, karate or judo, you bow when you go into the dojo as a sign of respect. You get to say, "Hey, Sid," or you greet Sidney, and you let Sidney know that you know he's there, and you know that he's friendly, and everything's okay. And that seems to have become a really fun ritual. So Jenny, my co-author in the book, Jenny Jellin, who covered the community art scene in Sudbury, that was her role at the Northern Life, often covered the community and Sudbury Theater Center, and she got into the habit after hearing the story of making sure that she greeted Sidney every single time. So the nice thing about that is Sidney was not a scary or malicious ghost. He was just evidence that there is a life beyond this world that we live in now, and there's an acknowledgement that he's still there, still connected with the theater, and still moving props around and causing a little bit of fun mischief.
And folks, I have a theater background as well. As a lighting designer, I used to work on rock shows, Rod Stewart, Bon Jovi, and all those guys, and it was a lot of fun, and live theater as well. And I don't know of a single theater in the whole country of Canada, and I would say around the world, that doesn't have a ghost resident not paying rent and feeding off the energy, perhaps, that comes with a live theater play. Now, I had asked you all to get a pen before. Write these numbers down. The telephone number is 310-421-4053. Once again, 310-421-4053. Now, if you want to Skype us and join the conversation with questions, very easy. Freedom Screen 2. FREEDOMSCREEN 2, Freedom Screen 2. Two easy ways to join us and ask questions for our guest tonight, Mark. I was going to say Lefebvre because I know Mark as Mark Lefebvre, which is his non-pen name. Sorry, Mark. Mark Leslie, folks.
That's okay. It's way easier to pronounce and spell Leslie, isn't it?
Leslie's a little bit easier for most folks. We're talking about ghosts tonight. We're going to be talking about Bigfoot, and our next subject I want to cover right away is UFOs. Now, I've had the MUFON director, which is the Mutual UFO Network, Northern Ontario executive on the show many times, Michel Deschamps, and you can find him in the archives at www.nightfrightshow.com talking about this very subject. And I know Michel plays a big part in your book as well. When you spoke with Michel about UFO sightings in and around the Sudbury area, was there one that stuck out and kind of creeped you out the most?
You know what? There were a lot. I was actually surprised when Jenny and I were putting the book together. We thought, okay, Sudbury has more than just really cool ghost stories. Sudbury has this UFO thing going on, but I didn't realize just how many UFO sightings for decades. I mean, I could have written. And entire books have been written on it. But, I mean, that became quite a huge chunk of the book only because there was so much to cover. And I had to break it down by decade and talk about UFOs in the 50s, UFOs in the 60s. And Michel, amazing resources available. I mean, he's quoted and cited so many times throughout the book because he has done an incredible job of bringing together UFO sightings in general, and obviously, with a passion for Northern Ontario and Sudbury. There's a few UFO stories, but I mean, the thing that still is the most interesting is in 1976 when over Creighton Mine. Oh,
wait a second, Mark.
Uh-oh.
Get the lights out, folks. This is going to be good. Go ahead, buddy.
There had been it started in the 50s when the UFO sightings really started to take off. And there's newspaper reports from the Sudbury Star, countless newspaper reports. Almost every week there's at least one or two reports in the paper when you dig into the archives. But then once you get up to 1976, there were, and it wasn't just, an eyewitness confirmed that they saw some lights in the sky, in the western sky or whatever. There was two individual confirmed reports from police detachments. Two separate police detachments reported the exact same thing. This was confirmed on the radar at the mine above Creighton, that there were objects in the sky. And there was such a panic in the time in 1976 that the U.S. Air Force sent 3 fighter pilots up to Sudbury to intercept these. Now, it's unclear as to whether they thought these were actual alien invaders or it was the Russians coming to, figure out how to destroy the mines in Sudbury. But the fact is there was such a tension in the air, like a Cold War sort of tension in the air,
right,
that when I talk to people about this, and I was alive in 1976, and when I talk to folks from my parents' generation or slightly older than me, they go, "Oh yeah, I remember that." Kind of like they remember, the hostage crisis in the 80s and various, things that you remember.
Historical events.
Yeah, like when Reagan was shot or things like that. You always remember the, 9/11. I mean, it wasn't quite as traumatic, but it was quite an elevated sense of fright that permeated anyone who was alive and paying attention to what was going on in the world. I mean, how often does the U.S. Air Force send 3 fighter pilots up to Sudbury to check things out? Now, there were documents, and Michel has some amazing further resources, which we also provide links to in the book so people can check it out. There's documented transcripts, half of it marked up because they've covered some stuff up that they don't want everyone to know about. But there's transcripts about what was being said, and it's really fascinating to see that Sudbury was the center of such intense fear. And what I love about this fear is that we're not quite sure if it's extraterrestrial or another nation that we are frightened of, and that was one of the central pieces for the UFO stories. There's some other really intriguing ones I'd love to get into if we've got some time.
Absolutely, we will for sure. Just let me tell folks who we're speaking to. Folks, I'm telling you, you're in for a great ride tonight. Settle in, relax, get the coffee going, the tea going, or a beverage of your choice going. Put your feet up. That's the most important thing. Just relax. We're going to take you on a great ride with some ghost stories, UFO sightings, and we will be getting, guaranteed, to Bigfoot, Sasquatch, and as he's known with the First Nation folks. Now, the book is called Spooky Sudbury, True Tales of the Eerie and Unexplained. And right on the front cover, you're going to see a mine. And it's a dark, dark tunnel, and it kind of just lures you in as it lures you into the book. Our guest tonight is Mark Leslie, and he's co-written this book with a good friend of mine, actually, Jenny Jellin, who interviewed me when I was in Sudbury. And it's a terrific book to settle in and just scare the bejesus out of yourself. Folks, www.nightfrightshow.com. Click on tonight's guest book cover. and get the book. You can order it right online. Easy way to get it. As with all our guests have their book covers associated with the nights that they were on, and you can order their books. Just easy way to do it all. I want to give you these numbers again. 310, if you're using a telephone, 310-421-4053. And on Skype, free call, Freedom Screen 2. Freedom Screen 2. Share some stories with us tonight. Share some ghost stories, UFO stories, and above all, who has seen a Bigfoot? Who has some Bigfoot stories for us as well? Because this is something, I had Jane Goodall on the show once, folks, and she told me she believes in Bigfoot. And Mark, I was at Science North with her, interviewing her, and Science North is a major focal point in Sudbury, by the way, folks. It houses an IMAX theater. They make IMAX films there as well. And it has a lot of interesting science-oriented and biological-oriented information there, relics dating back years and years and years. So if you ever get to Sudbury, that's a hub for you to visit. Now, I had interviewed Jane Goodall, and one of the questions I asked her, of course, was, do you believe in Bigfoot? And she said, yes, absolutely. She had been to so many Aboriginal places out in the middle of the bush all around the world, and they all have a common story about this large creature. So if that isn't evidence, more evidence for the existence of such a creature, well, that's from Jane Goodall. That's all I can say. That's a pretty credible source, I would say. Let's go back to Mark. Let's tell another UFO story, Mark, because you had suggested we do that.
So there's, anyone who's driven on a highway in the middle of night, in particular in a remote area like Highway 144 between Sudbury and Timmins.
Oh, I should tell you about this highway, folks. 2-lane highway, not separated, so you've got cars coming at you, but it's not busy. I mean, we're talking fairly remote, and it's like a snake. It goes up and down and all around, and the trees kind of bend in over the road. So, and with all the lakes in the summer, you're bound to run into a mile, let's say, folks, of whited out, kind of smoky, misty type of road, and it gets really, really eerie very quickly. Sorry to interrupt you, Mark.
No, and you're setting the scene perfectly, because there are a lot of hills in that area, and as you crest the hills, or as you're coming up to the crest of the hill, it reminds you so much of that movie poster from Close Encounters.
Oh yeah,
movie, and that always struck me when I was younger and driving on the highway at night. Is you've got nothing but what's visible in your headlights, pitch black all around you, and sometimes when there's a car on the other side of the hill that's cresting over it, all you see is a huge glowing light begin to come over the hill, and half the time I'm worried that light is not a car but something else. And that leads to the stories. And there's multiple instances where cars on the highway by themselves have been followed by lights in the sky. And the interesting thing about this is it's not just like a satellite or a moon where it's an illusion that it looks like the moon is chasing you, as you can see it flying along the side of the highway beside you. But this is a case where when they were stopping, the lights were stopping, and the lights were crossing from one side of the highway to another. Oh. And in some cases, chasing. I think that's the chapter is called The Hunters and the Hunted. And, where they're actually chased from Cartier, which is about a 40-minute drive north. It's maybe about an hour and a half from north of Sudbury on Highway 144, being chased all the way to the town of Onaping Falls, where they finally... and they're not sure if they lost it or the UFO just got interested in something else and took off in a different direction when they turned into the township of Onaping. And that sort of fear of being on your own, by yourself, and having this extraterrestrial entity up in the sky, not restricted by the road, be able to catch up to you no matter how fast you go, and no one else is out there but you on the highway by yourself. That's a pretty terrifying thing. It's always been one of my deepest fears, is being stranded alone on that highway and having something come at you, whether it's UFO or whether it's some creature that just steps out of the woods.
And it is very remote up there because many times I had driven the route to go see Mom in Montreal between Sudbury and Montreal. And again, the road, it's called the Trans-Canada Highway. It was made in 1948, and it shows. That's when there was 3 tractors and a pickup truck in the whole country. And it just kind of snakes along. Again, it's a 2-lane highway, unseparated, and of course there's no lights on the highway. You're in the middle of the bush virtually. This was erected, as I said, in 1948 under Prime Minister Louis Saint Laurent, and I'm going to tie a little bit of trivia in there. Paul Hellyer, who many of you will recognize that name, he's the ex-Canadian Defense Minister who has come out and given disclosure about UFOs, used to work for Prime Minister Louis Saint Laurent, and he was integral in bringing all these things to light in Canada. So all that to say is I have driven along there many times, and all you can see is stars. If you turn off the lights, you are in another world, folks, and that's where we're going to go tonight without question with Mark Leslie, and we're talking about a book that he's written called Spooky Sudbury. Now, what I'm wondering, the story Mark just told about being alone on the highway with lights coming at you and chasing you, who else out there has a similar story? And that's what I'd like to hear from. I'd like to hear people truckers even. They have multiple stories I get from truckers all the time where something weird is going on in the sky. Call in. Don't be shy. 310-421-4053. 310-421-4053. Free call, Freedom Screen 2. And that's via Skype. Freedom Screen 2. We'll take your calls right away. Mark, let's go back. I had mentioned Bigfoot, and these are stories that primarily emerge from our First Nation folk. Now, can you give a little bit of a brief overview of the First Nation folk that live around there, and Manitoulin Island, I was thinking, and some of the sightings that have been reported?
Sure. Just to go back, is that Sasquatch is often the term that is used to describe, from First Nation legends, but Sasquatch was actually derived. It was sort of an anglicized version of the word. It's derived from the Coast Salish First Nations names for the creature, which is Sesquat or Sexquesh. And I'm not pronouncing this properly.
No, it's a difficult language for sure.
But it was anglicized in a 1929 Maclean's magazine article called "Introducing BC, British Columbia's Hairy Giants," and that's where, in Canada at least, that's where the term Sasquatch was derived. The term Bigfoot, which is kind of synonymous for Sasquatch, was. I think it was in the late 50s, and it was shortly after the team working up in Bluff Creek, the famous Roger Patterson photo of Bigfoot, of the Sasquatch term, and that's related to the casts or the mold of the footprints that became famous shortly after that video was shot. And that, of course, is where the term Bigfoot obviously stems from, because there was a big foot.
The big honking foot there.
So when I was doing the research for the book, one of the things I found most fascinating was there was a video posted from December 2012, and keep in mind, we're finishing the book off. It's already due at the publishers, and you get more information about a recent sighting. And it wasn't just a sighting that was reported, but there's an actual video, several minutes long, in the winter, and it's recorded, and there are these large bare humanoid footprints in the fresh snow along the side of the highway, and you can hear the family, the father, the mother, the children, kind of panicked, and is like, no, let's see where these go. Let's get out of here. It's really terrifying. Almost, you can sense the tension in the air, and it goes on for several minutes. As they're concerned, is like, let's not get. Don't slow the vehicle down. Let's get out of here. What if we actually encounter this thing? Because it looked like the tracks were fresh.
And she wanted to stop and follow this thing?
Well, I mean, they're intrigued, of course. Like, and I'm thinking, look at the size of these footprints. You don't want to see what
I
this
was going to
is.
say, I guess I'm the biggest sissy in the world, folks, because I would have bolted. Like, that would have been it. The headlights, and the whole dust and everything. That's all you would have seen from me. So
Even earlier, Spanish River, which is not too far away from where this was shot, there were large footprints found in the mud near the Spanish River, and just around the same time there was a couple that were in a canoe, and they looked across, and what they saw, a creature that looked very similar to that image from the original Bigfoot Patterson shot, just squatting on a log on the other side of the bank, and they actually just got out of there because they weren't sure if it swam or not, and they just wanted to get far enough away from it. So there's sites there. There's sites in Killarney as well, and we're talking, I mean, not all that long ago from the time that we put the book together. It's the other thing I should mention, because we talked about Bigfoot, talked about Sasquatch, is there's two different groups that cover these types of sightings in Northern Ontario. So there's Ontario Sasquatch, which is one of the groups, and Ontario Bigfoot as well. And they kind of obviously are covering very similar sightings. Just one of them is using one of the terms that we use for this cryptid creature, and the other one is using a more First Nations styled term to describe this creature.
That's pretty frightening stuff there, buddy. We've got a caller who's got some questions for you. His name is Ryan. I'm going to add him right now, and there we go. Hi, Ryan. How are you? Are you with me? I guess Skype takes a few seconds, folks. Listeners of this show and fans of the show will know that once we add somebody, it takes a few seconds for them to come online. Skype isn't perfect, but it's wonderful. A friend of mine just left Kingston and is in Australia now, and we spent a good hour via Skype looking at each other. And, of course, she's got the tan, and I've got this cold, pale look. Are you there, Ryan? How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing swell. How are you?
Great, man. Great. Do you have a question for Mark?
Well, I'm lived in Barrie my whole life. Avid listener of Revolution Radio as well. So I just thought it was very peculiar because I wanted to ask. I do have my own UFO sighting, which was just downtown Barrie on the lakeshore.
Oh, I want to hear it. Let's
go. Now, I should tell folks where Barrie is. Folks, Toronto, go north about an hour, and you're going to run into a wonderful spot called Barrie. And again, there's lakes everywhere, and it sits on, what's the name of the lake? Is it Superior?
Simcoe.
Simcoe, I'm sorry. And if you travel another 2.5 hours, then you'll hit Sudbury. So it is a remote community, but it's a community of about 170,000, if I'm not mistaken.
250,000 now. It's growing.
Wow.
Yeah, Newmarket and Barrie are growing very, very fast.
They just grow by leaps and bounds. Okay, Ryan, hit us with that story.
Well, it's very peculiar because it does link in with my Opa that passed away a year ago.
Oh, sorry.
But it was a weird night. I used to work night shift, and I used to take the bus, and the bus terminal was right downtown, and I would go have a smoke. I'd have to wait about a half hour, and I hated waiting, sitting inside the terminal. So I'd always go along the lake, and I'd just sit out the rock or whatever, and it'd be the coldest night, doesn't matter. Well, one night I had my camera out, and I saw this flickering light, and I'm like, oh, it's a UFO, kind of jokingly to myself. Well, it kind of just turned into one. Kind of came up, and it came over the lake and right above me, and I was just really... It was just a weird feeling, kind of anxious kind of feeling. And then the black triangle, too, popped out of nowhere.
Really?
And then it just went right over the clock of City Hall, as if they were just kind of colliding past. My instincts, because I've always been into this kind of stuff, is just as the one was watching the other, right?
I want to ask you guys, now, Ryan and Mark, do you feel you guys, because you're into it, are more susceptible to it than somebody who might be closed off? And therefore, it kind of allows you to see these things?
No,
Right?
I think you just can. Well, it's kind of like back in the day. Everyone used to think that witches could predict things, but they just could actually evaluate the simple scenarios a lot better. Nowadays, a lot of people, there's so much things to do. No one can really focus on things at a broader spectrum of all subjects. Because if you knew a subject, you're more susceptible to, like, wanting to be rich. You're more susceptible to being rich if you think about it a lot, because you'll find ways to make money.
I see. So it's the power of the mind. Mark, what do you think of Ryan's story?
I find it's really interesting. I like the
Sure.
the two different things that you saw with the black triangle, like sort of coming out, and
Well, the story doesn't really end there. It continues.
So what happened next?
Well, it kind of goes into light beings as well. Like, this is the weird part, is I get to work and I find one of those little pendants someone left at, because I was working at a gas station at the point. It was just Shell right off Highway 400, just in Barrie off Mapleview there.
Mm-hmm.
And
I stopped there many
one of those
times.
kind of silvery, small kind of dime looking with an angel on it, and on the back it's always be there, whatever. I ended up giving it to my Opa, and my Opa had bypass surgery, and he saw a light being. And he always kept on to this pendant, and it was just kind of a weird kind of synchronicity and everything like that. And my Opa's mother was I would have to say a powerful psychic, because she was able to predict in the World War II that my Opa's brother would come home with no leg day before, right? So, and he used to tell me all these stories, and he had out-of-body experiences. So with my Opa and the UFO, they tied in together that night, and it still kind of, there's a longer story to that, but that was my only UFO experience. I never had a Bigfoot experience.
Would you like to extend the story? You feel free to if you want, Ryan. The reason why I mention that is because I'm sure there's a lot of folks out there right now with similar stories, and they may feel shy to share them.
In the end, my Opa passed away last year, December 21st, 2012, which is another weird synchronicity.
Yeah, no kidding, 2012.
Yeah, and the fact that he saw a light being like years before, and he used to say he had out-of-body experiences, and his mother being psychic, and they were Germans that came back from World War II. So there's a certain extent of supernatural to that story mixed with, I don't know where the UFO would tie in, but it was just at the same night that I found that pendant that I gave him. And it just had appeared there. It just kind of like it was left there, which was very strange.
Mark?
I think there's so many things beyond what we can conceive of or think about going on, and I think as you guys were talking about, I think it's easy to close your mind, and it's easy to just say, oh, that was just X, rather than looking at it a second time and saying, wait a second, that is not something that has come from a natural occurrence. This is something that obviously is more powerful than we can properly understand and appreciate. This coincidence, of the lights finding the pendant and the there's a lot of things that connect us, and there's a lot of things in the universe that run as unseen undercurrents that either connect humans together or connect us with something else that we may not normally be able to see. I can't say I have ever experienced anything that I would say is supernatural, but that's not to say that I don't believe in these things, and I'm not open-minded to it. Like, I can't see atoms either, but I believe that they're what hold us together. So I sort of apply the same logic to listening to stories and trying to understand what it is that ties life in the universe with other life in the universe.
It's funny, guys, because and folks listening at home, and hopefully you're all in a safe spot tonight. Or if you're on the highway, by the way, folks, just take it easy tonight, especially if you are in the northern area, because the weather's not great. So, no accidents tonight. Just take your time, and we're going to be there with you all the way through for the next hour and a half or so. One of the things that is alarming to me, and I discussed this with the MUFON director of Northern Ontario, I mentioned his name before, Michel Deschamps. I said, Michel, what is the attraction for the UFOs in Northern Ontario? And this would include the Barrie region as well. And he said, I think it's the water. And I was wondering how you guys feel about that.
The water. It's always been there my whole life. I've always lived in Barrie since I was 5, so as long as I can remember. Yeah, I can't really say much about that.
Okay, fair enough.
What do you think, Mark?
Mark?
You know what? Water is one of the ultimate life-sustaining things. We need water to survive. Most living beings need some sort of water to survive. How much of a percentage of our bodies is made up of water? That seems to be a biological, natural thing. Think about, and I even think about, there are, certain plot lines and stories where the aliens came just to steal our water because we had fresh water and they didn't. You hear stories about Mars used to have
That's right.
canals and water, and there's evidence that there was water on Mars at one time. What happened to, with no water, there is no life. The life that we have found on other planets in our solar system, there's evidence that life could be supported on, was it one of the moons of Saturn? Because under the ice, there's actually water.
Isn't that amazing? I heard that story too.
When you look at evolution and you look at just purely scientific, we probably came from fish in the sea and evolved. So it's very natural to think that maybe they're here for the nickel. Maybe they're here for the, the richness of the things you can mine from the earth. Maybe they're here for the water. And in Sudbury, my God, talk about fresh water. From Barrie all the way through Parry Sound and Sudbury and North Bay. It's a rich
I think,
area for that.
Mark, if I developed from a fish, I think it was probably a whale. All that to say is also, folks listening south of the border in the United States, Canada has the most fresh water in the world. It also has the second largest, are you ready for this, oil deposits in the world. Only Saudi Arabia beats us out. And we supply, you're not going to believe this, everybody thinks most of the oil to the United States comes from Saudi Arabia or the Middle East. Not true. Canada supplies the most oil to the United States. So there you go. There's a couple of factoids many folks aren't aware of. Mark Leslie is our guest tonight. Stick around, folks. If you've got some stories for us, Ryan's just called in. He's still with us, by the way, in Barrie, Ontario, which is a little bit north of Toronto. And the telephone number is 310, if you're on a telephone, 310-421-4053. Easier way to get us, if you have Skype, it's a free call, baby. Freedom Screen 2. Freedom Screen 2. We're talking about Mark Leslie's new book. He's our guest tonight, called Spooky Sudbury. Now, Sudbury, if you're just joining us, is a mining city. It's got all these incredible tunnels running zigzag everywhere, crisscrossing underneath the city. And it's true tales of the eerie and unexplained. Easy way to get any guests that we have on the book. www.nightfrightshow.com. www.nightfrightshow.com, and there you will find Mark's book without question. Just order it from the comfort of your own home. Let's go back to Mark. I want to talk about Bigfoot, Mark. Some more stories about Bigfoot and the lore that the First Nation folks have talked about for years and years and years. Still with me, Mark?
Yeah, sorry, I had my mic turned off because I was coughing. Sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay, buddy. Ryan,
So
stick with us if you want. If you have a question, just feel free to interject, my friend.
I kind of just have one more question because you guys are from Sudbury. I have some friends up there, and they have a band that's, I guess, fairly popular, Woven Ancestry. Have you heard of them?
I'm sorry, I haven't been in Sudbury for 3 years.
I haven't had the pleasure, I'm afraid.
Yeah, but I'm sure they're probably with what's the name of the newsletter? Music, Film, and Motion. I'm sure they're probably associated with those guys. So,
Maybe, yeah. Anyways, guys, I just wanted to fill in with my story, and if you had any stories, because I live in King City now, if there's any ghost stories around here, haunted places there, or in Barrie. You guys have a great night. I appreciate you guys listening.
Thanks a lot, Ryan. That was a great story. Thanks for sharing.
Sure was, Ryan. Thank you so much, my friend. That was Ryan all the way from Barrie. Now, let's go back to Mark. And again, folks, if you want to call in, Freedom Screen 2 is the Skype. Mark, you know, this Bigfoot thing is on my mind these days. And I got a funny feeling with everybody with a cell phone now that has, or a smartphone, that has the availability to take photos and videos. I think we're going to get some kind of disclosure sooner than we think. Yeah. You know, and I think it's the remoteness surrounding Sudbury that probably tends to have these creatures feel comfortable there. And perhaps because they've been with the native population that's been around that area for so long and they're very comfortable with them too, maybe there's a symbiotic relationship going on there. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, you know what, I think that's really that's probably the thing that's going to do it, because oftentimes, you know, historically it was you were lucky to have a camera on you. And now most people carry cameras with them in the guise of a smartphone.
Absolutely.
Which that was not the case. I mean, my earliest Bigfoot experience, I mean, I was a child, I was fascinated by stories of Bigfoot. And I used to go on hikes with my buddies on the quest to see if I could see if there were any Bigfoot creatures living in our area. Like, I was just fascinated by it, read everything I could. And the one time that I had an encounter was I was leaving my friend's house. It was winter. It was probably maybe 9 o'clock at night. So in wintertime in Sudbury, 9 o'clock at night is pitch dark. It may as well be midnight. It's quiet. My buddy's just gone into his house, and I'm leaving his yard. And I look out across the field, down a little ravine, and across a creek, and I see this black creature slowly walking away from me up the hill. I mean, he's got to be half a mile away.
Ooh.
And I got this chill in my bones. I was so terrified. I just stood there and watched. And then this creature turned around and skied down the hill. And I went, oh my God. I was so scared, thinking just the way that and it was obviously somebody just kind of going up this small hill with skis, but the way that they were walking was exactly the way, you imagine a large creature was lumbering up the hill. And obviously the bulk was the snow pants and all of that. Mm-hmm. And I remember standing there for, it must have been at least half an hour, thinking, oh my God, I'm going to see something if I just stay here. That was like a premonition that there's something there and I should keep looking. And I stood there, frozen to the bone, watching and waiting, because that skier took off and went somewhere else, and just watching the path leading up, disappearing into the woods, waiting for something to appear. And of course, if I'd had a cell phone, my mom would have called me at that time and said, "Get your butt home. It's past your bedtime." But that was my Bigfoot experience, and I remember the chill that I had was absolutely terrifying. And so, I mean, the thing I can tell you is, if I ever do actually see something like that, I'm not sure how I would react, because I'm probably the largest chicken you'll ever meet.
Oh yeah, no, I think I would fall into that category very well myself. So don't worry about that, folks. We're speaking with Mark Leslie tonight, and we're going to be coming up to the break in a few minutes. But before we do that, I would like to get to some stories from around Ramsey Lake. Now, Ramsey Lake, folks, is, as we said before, is in the middle of Sudbury, and it's a huge lake. It's deep. It was formed when this meteorite 2 billion years ago hit the Sudbury Basin, and the basin is, how many? Is it 26 miles in circular, approximately? Is that right?
You know what? Something like that. It's incredibly huge. And,
it's huge.
And
yeah.
it's not just a big round lake. It's twisty and turny and complex.
And it, like I said, and you know, one of the things that creeped me out the most, Mark, when we first got there was there's a little tiny island in the middle of the lake called Snake
Island, yes.
I don't like snakes, folks. What I was always curious about is how the hell did they get out there in the middle of this island, and how many are populating the place for it to adopt the name Snake Island. So I was always a little leery swimming by that island, let me tell you. What are some of the stories from around Ramsey Lake?
Well, the first thing I have to do to set the scene for Ramsey Lake is we talked about Science North. We talked about the Science Center of the North, which is a snowflake shape nestled in the rocks on the shores of that lake. And it is a beautiful scene, but you can't help but envision that a UFO has landed right beside the lake. And I always thought that from, I think it was in the early 80s when I was still, a child, and they erected Science North, and I went, oh my God, it looks like a UFO. And like, no, it's a snowflake shape. No, it's a UFO. And so I always describe it to, when my son, when we're driving up, like, oh, look, Alexander, it looks like a UFO sitting on the rocks. But that really sets the scene, because just across Bell Park, just down the street from, or down the lake from Science North, and you can walk. There's a beautiful path that takes you along from Science North, along through Bell Park, and then up to St. Joseph's Hospital, the General Hospital, which is now closed.
It's abandoned now, folks, and we all know what goes on in hospitals.
The things that happen in hospitals is people are born and people die. Yeah. This is the place by which you enter into the world and you exit. Talk about a portal. Talk about a place where if there are ghosts walking among us, this is most likely the type of place they can be found. And after the hospital closed down, there are stories of workers going into the hospital, working on stuff, and hearing things. And I think one of the most creepy tales was the sound of a little girl giggling and the sound of her dropping marbles on the floor and looking and seeing nothing there but hearing the echoes of the marbles rolling along the floors. And I tell you, I would not be staying there, that's for sure. But that's one of the stories that gave me the biggest goosebumps. And of course, this is down in the basement, where we know it's in the basement of a hospital, don't we?
Yeah, the morgue.
The morgue, exactly. And now the scariest thing about this, and I think the stories have just begun, because they've demolished part of the hospital, and they are now renovating it into condos where people are going to live. And you couldn't pay me enough to move into that. I'm sure it's going to be beautiful, but we've all seen the movie Poltergeist.
Oh, yeah.
We knows what happens.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they're in for a treat. There's going to be a whole rash of new stories for sure. Now, it is a beautiful spot because it is on the shore of this gorgeous lake.
Spot. Gorgeous.
But at the same token, folks, it's an ex-hospital. I mean, what could be more conductive to scary, spooky stories than an ex-hospital? We're coming up to a break. Mark, you stick with us, okay, my friend? The break will be about 6 or 7 minutes long, folks. Mark Leslie, he's joining us tonight. Ghost stories, UFO stories, and Bigfoot all night. We'll see you in a few minutes, folks. And welcome back, everybody. What a great show we've got going tonight. If you're just joining us, we're talking about ghost stories all night from a remote city called Sudbury in northern Ontario, Canada, of course. The book is called Spooky Sudbury, True Tales of the Eerie and Unexplained. But I should put a qualification there. Sudbury itself, if you're going to visit, it's not going to scare the bejesus out of you. We're just saying that these are the stories behind the scenes, if you will, and you will be able to investigate them yourself. It is a beautiful spot. Many people call it God's country, and with good reason. There is virtually a huge lake every 3 feet. There's a Laurentian University. There's hospitals there. It's just a fabulous, fabulous place to be and vacation and take in Science North. You can even go down in replication of a mine, an actual mine, and check it out for yourself. So there's a little tourist plug for Sudbury. Mark Leslie is our guest tonight. He's written this book with Jenny Dellen, who is also a Sudbury native. Mark now lives in Hamilton, by the way, and he's written another book, and fans of this show will recognize Mark Leslie's name because I had him on when he wrote a book called Haunted Hamilton. And this is part of our culture. I would even offer folks ghost stories, UFO sightings, the paranormal in general, I think is part of the human condition. And I think that's something that unites us in ways that we haven't explored yet. And as I said at the outset of the show, you know, folks, if it takes the whole world sitting around a campfire roasting marshmallows, you know, notice how I always default right back to food in my case. You know,
I was going to say you default to campfires. That's very Sudbury of you.
Thanks, Mark. You rescued me on that one. If it takes everybody sitting around a campfire to get us to stop shooting each other's butts off, so be it, and let it happen right away. Now, let's go back to the book. Oh, I should tell you where you should get it. www.nightfrightshow.com, www.nightfrightshow.com. Click on tonight's guest book cover. That'll take you right to a spot where you can order the book. Settle in tonight, folks. Get the coffee going. Get the tea going. Get a beverage of your choice going. And if you'd like to call in and share your ghost stories, UFO sightings, or Bigfoot stories that I'm really interested in at this point, I'm going to give you 2 ways you can do it. One is via telephone. The phone number is 310-421-4053, 310-421-4053. Easier way if you have Skype, easy, free phone call, Freedom Screen 2. Once again, folks, Freedom Screen 2. And you can share your stories with us, or if you have questions for Mark, feel free. Let's go back to Mark. Mark, you know, when I was in Sudbury, Laurentian University, I did the show, as you know. You were there several times.
At midnight, it was terrifying.
That's where I want to go.
I had to drive into the middle of nowhere in the pitch black and go meet you in a dark studio to talk about ghost stories. Are you kidding me?
Are you crazy? I was so scared after I do my show, folks, to go and get out to the parking lot, because the parking lot is nestled between a bunch of trees. And there was virtually nobody around at that time.
Except monsters that might walk out of the woods.
Yeah, precisely. And, you know, I was always a little bit nervous. I'll be honest with you, folks. Now, you've written a great book, and the reason why I brought up Laurentian University, because you wrote another great book that you were on the show for, and that's called Campus Chills.
Oh, yes.
Can you tell the folks a little bit of it? You know, I'm in Kingston right now, folks, and we have what I would call one of Canada's, one of Canada's Ivy League universities, called Queen's University. And the building goes back, I think to the dawn of time, but honestly, probably the late 1800s. And I was in the theater that is there, and you notice how I come back to the theater, but can you tell us a few of the stories from Campus Chills?
Yeah, so just to let you guys know, Campus Chills is fiction. Campus Chills was a horror anthology of horror stories told from campuses across Canada. And we have authors such as Kelly Armstrong that wrote original stories for this, Steve Vernon from Halifax, who is a wonderful a storyteller who tells a lot of true ghost stories as well as fiction. But The Legend of Prospero's Ghost is a story that I wrote about McMaster University, which is where I was working at the time. Hamilton. And it's It's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek story of a dead English professor who was a Shakespearean scholar, and his nickname was Professor Prospero. And it is called The Legend of Prospero's Ghost. And, I mean, that is available. You can download that story completely for free on websites such as Kobo or Amazon Kindle, or it's available on Wattpad as well, or you can read it for free. And it is the story about what happens when the university, which has an espresso book machine, is able to recreate the original version of The Tempest. And that Prospero is a character from The Tempest, which is why this professor was known as Professor Prospero. He dies and bequeaths his copy to the library. The library gives it to the bookstore, and they use it to replicate. They make copies of this book, and they're producing them to give to students to study. And Prospero makes an appearance from beyond the grave and decides he's going to kill anybody who dares get their hands on his precious text. And so it's something that's very, very passionate and close to my heart, because the next book I'm working on is called Tomes of Terror, and it is a book about haunted bookstores and libraries. So this is a wonderful ghost story because it takes place in the library where the ghost first appears and basically kills the person responsible for creating a digital version of the book, and then finds his way to the bookstore where he's killing the person who's making extra copies, producing them on this machine, the espresso book machine. And then, of course, sets about in the tank, which is in the deep, dark underground of the university where textbooks are sold. It used to be an old water storage facility, so there's basically one way in and out of the tank. And what happens is our main characters get trapped in the tank with this vengeful ghost, Professor Prospero, who is basically out to kill anyone who dares touch the books. So I think that's one of my favorite stories from the
Campus Chills, folks. That's another good one to settle in with and have a nice cup of coffee with it in the middle of the eve. And you can get that book as well at www.nightfrightshow.com. Join us, folks. Give us a call. Freedom Screen 2 on Skype. Freedom Screen 2, or once again, the telephone, 310-421-4053. The book we're talking about tonight and Mark's promoting right now is called Spooky Sudbury. Mark Leslie and Jenny Gellum have co-authored this book, True Tales of the Eerie and Unexplained. Okay, let me set this up. Now, Sudbury, folks, as I said before, is a mining city. Boasts around, I think it's 170,000 people, but most live on the outskirts of the downtown area. So you get an idea that it's remote. There's a vibe in the city that is very positive, but there's an underlining, virtually a vibration from every time they blast in the mines because the tunnels run under the city. That's where I want to go now. I want to go deep below the surface, Mark, and tell one of the ghost stories about folks that were in the mines, because these are guys and girls these days that go down there every day, risk their lives hundreds and hundreds of feet below the surface, and blast away in this hard, hard rock. It is so hard, it's called the Canadian Shield, as a matter of fact. Could you tell one of the stories from deep, dark in the mine?
Yeah, definitely. And you know what? You said that beautifully, because growing up in Levack, which is about a 45-minute drive north of Sudbury, Levack has a mine there.
Yeah.
And that's where I grew up. And you got used to the fact that they would be blasting multiple times during the day at scheduled times. The house would shake from the blasts. And I was, honest to God, I was I thought I was going to see a miner come with his little pickaxe come through the basement wall sometimes. That's how close it felt.
Precisely.
When my wife first came with me up to Levack, and she's from Hamilton, so she's from the steel town where, they send the nickel to get processed into steel. She came up and she was terrified, and it was just a normal thing for me. It's, oh no, that's just the blasting. What do you mean the blasting? I go, well, they're blasting the rock, so they in the mine. He's like, what? You live like this?
And on the seismic system, the Richter system, you're going to get a 3.2, 3.3 sometimes too.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
It's like
it
a small
shakes the
earthquake.
house.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when you think about, here are these men who are down in the depths of the earth, half a mile down, pitch black, mostly by themselves or very, very limited, cut off at least a good 15-minute elevator ride from getting back up to the surface.
That's right.
With these high, incredible explosives. You know, I mean, it is a very risky, dangerous place to be in and of itself. Here's the thing about this, and this is a story. I sat down with Hans, who's a retired miner who goes and talks to kids and schools. He's really passionate. He has spent his life at Levack Mine. He's an amazing, wonderful man, and I sat with him at the Tim Hortons on Highway 144 in Dowling for about an hour and a half, just telling me incredible stories, half of which I couldn't use. They were amazing, fun stories, but the one I was most interested in was the story of the ghost on haunted level 2650 at Levack Mine. And so this is back in the day when on the weekends, on a Sunday, there were basically 3 or 4 miners working. They were just keeping things going. They were just kind of there doing some, you know, high-level maintenance, not the progressive work that was being done during the regular shifts during the week. So you basically had the one man who was down in the mine by himself. There was one man operating, and that was the fire guard, and one man operating the elevator from the top. And the beautiful thing about this is I'd had the privilege of being at that exact elevator shaft and going down that mine. Thank God I hadn't heard this story before I had done this. When my uncle brought me down to check out the mine when I think I was about 14 or 15 years old.
And I should say, Mark, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I should say, folks, in most cases, the spin-off shafts, if you will, the tunnels, don't have any lights in them. And they are, I'm not kidding, they are pitch black. You can feel the pressure, the weight of the world on your shoulders virtually. There's something about being that deep in the pressure. And the sound, it's like being in a fog, if you've ever been in a fog, and you can't identify where the sound's coming from. The only light you have is tapped into a battery around your waist, and that's on your helmet. Yeah. Sorry, Mark, to interrupt you.
No, I mean, when you close your eyes, and I was down there with my uncle, and they shut off the lights. There were some sections where there were lights. They're like, you know, like a section where there was a sort of, not like a mini sort of, not a kitchen, but like a kitchen area down in the mine so you could go and have lunch. And it was cleaner than just the rock and the wet, and it's so wet. You turn off the lights on your helmet, and it's darker than when you close your eyes. It is pitch black, and you can hear the dripping of the water, the echo of any noise from a mile down the shaft. You can hear that, and it is really, really eerie. So imagine this man down there by himself, walking in the dark, going from station to station, and he sees a pair of eyes staring at him from the darkness of the tunnel ahead of him. The only light is the light on his helmet. There's these eyes staring at him in the dark. He calls up to the man operating the elevator, and he says, "Get me out of here. There's someone down here with me." And the guy on the surface is saying, "This is impossible. There's no one down there. You're the only guy down there. Like, the ships are all over. You're by yourself." He goes, you know, whatever. He's like, "Send the elevator down. I got to go." And so, I mean, it takes several minutes just to send the elevator down. And then another, you're looking at a good 15 minutes to get back to the surface. In the meantime, he's down there by himself. He finally comes up. It is still. So we've all been scared. We've all been startled. Mm-hmm. And then usually a few minutes later, you are, you go, okay, everything's fine. I'm okay. 15 minutes later, he finally gets up to the surface. He is still absolutely terrified. There's a ghost down there. I am never going down again. And he swore on a stack of Bibles he would never go underground again because of what he saw. And he never did return down to the shaft. And so that's the story. That's where the legend of the ghost of level 2650 comes from. Now, Hans, who told me the story, had a couple theories. One of the theories is that it could have been an animal who got onto the logs that they send down on a train, and they send down on a shaft, and they're nestled in there. So potentially a raccoon or some other creature and it was the light from his helmet that was reflecting off the lights. You've seen a cat's eye.
Sure, of course, at night, yeah.
And that's what some of the miners believe, is that, well, that's probably what he saw, but he swears that there was a ghost down there, and he refused to go back to that level. And so there's a story of the ghost on level 2650, and there's a little bit of sort of that trepidation that theater goers have when they have the haunted theater, of not wanting to be alone on level 2650, for fear that there's a spirit down there just walking around. I mean, and the sad reality is, there are a lot of men who lost their lives.
That's right.
Underground, and some of them, their bodies were trapped and never recovered.
That's right.
Some of them were recovered, but there's a lot. I mean, it's a very dangerous vocation, and the men, the miners, and I mean, when you're from Sudbury, you know you are related to a miner, or you have dear friends who are miners, and there's not a life hasn't been touched by a tragedy that has happened. I'm not saying it's a dangerous, scary place, because there's a lot of incredible safety procedures that they have, but it's still a very dangerous vocation. And sadly, there are a lot of people who have died in the mines, and so it's not unlikely that there are spirits wandering around, lost and trapped, unable to come up to the surface.
And that's a very good point you bring up, Mark, because, when a life is lost like that, tragically, as you say, instantaneously, sometimes they don't realize that they should be passing on, going to the light, if you will.
Yeah, there's a business.
Yeah. And I was going to say, too, that, the safety precautions are there, folks, and they've cut down on the deaths incredibly. I mean, we're not talking about the 1910s anymore, 1920s. But it is, nonetheless, you're still dealing with explosives. You're dealing with huge, huge trucks and machinery underground in cramped spaces, no light, as we've said before. So the potential for tragedy is always, always there. And I'm going to tell you a true story, from one of the mines in the 1950s. In the 1950s, they used to use a different mixture of explosives to blow the face of the mine, which is the end of the tunnel. And often they would set it, and not all the explosives would go off. So whoever was youngest or the newest in would have to go down and examine and see which blast hasn't gone off. So talk about a scary, scary occupation in the 50s. It's much different now. They have better safety, better explosives for that matter, and different ways of mining that is much, much safer for the folks underground. But that's a true story from the 50s. And often, they'd go down and, let's face it, it's like Russian roulette, right, folks? I mean, you don't know if that's going to go off in your face, or if it's just a dud, or if it's a loose wire, and if you start messing around with it, even just to disconnect it, it could go off right there in your face, and often it would. And that would lead to tragedy and somebody else without a husband or a son. It was primarily a male vocation in those days. Folks, we're talking about Spooky Sudbury, True Tales of the Eerie and Unexplained with Mark Leslie. www.nightfrightshow.com. Click on tonight's guest book cover. Order the book. Settle in, folks. Lots of time left. I want to hear from you guys. Come on, everybody's got a great ghost story. You're out in the middle of an abandoned highway or something. Not an abandoned highway, but an isolated highway, and something weird is going on. You see a shadow run across the road at the tip of your headlights, UFO sightings, and Bigfoot. This is a mystery I want to get more and more into, primarily because, as I said before in the first hour, Jane Goodall has validated them. And she said everywhere she goes around the world, in local Aboriginal lore and local Aboriginal people come up to her all the time and say, yeah, we've seen this big, huge creature, and the way it's described looks like a Bigfoot. And this is from around the world. So there's got to be something to it. It can't just be ignored. And this is why I want to hear from folks that have had a Bigfoot experience, even if it's just a sense if you're out in the bush alone and you think something's watching you. Easy way to get us, 310-421-4053. That's the telephone, of course, folks. And if you want to Skype us, free call, Freedom Screen 2. Freedom Screen 2. Got questions for Mark? Tell us your UFO stories. Tell us your ghost stories. Tell us your Bigfoot stories. All of the above. First Nation folks, were you able to speak with First Nation folks for this book, Mark?
I didn't actually do any of that for this particular book. Jenny did a lot of the groundwork. At the time, I was still living in Hamilton. Jenny was living in Sudbury, so she did a lot of the footwork and in-person interviews with a lot of people, which was great because there's a combination of research from, as I said, digging through newspaper archives,
precisely,
and other books and things like that, combined with the in-person interviews. I mean, I had the privilege of a few in-person conversations like with Hans, but no, I didn't have the pleasure of. Oh, it looks like we have somebody joining us.
Yeah, somebody's just called in. It's Bill from Nevada. How are you doing, Bill? Are you with us?
I'm with you.
Hi, Bill. How are you tonight?
Well, trying to stay warm up here in South Lake Tahoe, Nevada.
Ooh, I hear you.
But not as bad as where you're at, I'm sure.
Well, it's pretty cool here too. Let me tell you.
Listen, I wanted to ask Mark, and I have enjoyed the show. My wife and I were driving down a highway one night, and it was construction. They were rebuilding a bridge, and all of a sudden, an old jalopy. It looked like a 1935 Packard. With that trunk that was in the, you could open it up from the trunk so people could sit in it or whatever, pulled in front of us and started down the road and just vanished.
Went off the side of the bridge.
And my wife looked at me, she said, "Did you see that?" And I said, "Yeah, I saw that." And so I believe in apparitions. I was wondering if Mark has ever heard of an apparition of a car.
Yeah, you know what? That is a not uncommon occurrence because when you think about we leave spiritual impressions where we go. So a spirit of a person in an area like Sydney, the ghost I talked about, the Sudbury Theatre Centre, that he left his impression in time and space in that theatre, and it is not uncommon. We talk about passions running high. People are very passionate about their cars, and cars themselves can be a very prominent statement of a person and a lifestyle and an activity. Think about your family road trips. Think about the incredible, intense memories you have as a child in the backseat of your parents' car. It's not uncommon then for, in my opinion, for a car itself to become that impression that is there and forever, either driving along that highway and then just disappearing, or, there's something happened with the people in that vehicle that was so intense and so powerful that it could have left an impression. And when you guys were driving, you picked up on that impression and saw it. And at least that's my belief of something. I love to hear stories like that.
Me too.
Well, I tell you, because both of us were able to validate what we both saw.
Usually I'm the one with the visions.
Normally you just have one person that sees something, but it made me a believer that there are apparitions on, because my wife and I both saw it at the same time. So I just was curious if you'd ever heard anything like that before.
I have heard several stories like that. Actually, one of the first stories I had sold as a fiction writer was actually set on Highway 144, and it involved the hitchhiker getting picked up by a ghost car on the highway as well, because that was always a type of story that intrigued me. And I would wonder, where did this ghost car come from? I mean, who was the driver, and why is he still forever driving down that route, never making it to his destination? Yeah, Highway 144 in Northern Ontario.
Oh, okay. Well, this was Highway 60, the Riverside Freeway from L.A. to Palm Springs.
Is it very remote, Bill, that highway, or is it a
no?
well-traveled?
It's not. It's more remote than what the 405 or the 5 freeway. It's out kind of in the country. It's so.
It's an alternate parallel route to the 10.
Yeah, it parallels the 10 freeway, the San Bernardino freeway. So it's a little bit more remote than other highways, in Southern California. But as I said, there had been a flood or something, and they were renovating a big bridge, and so it was a lot of construction stuff. But it was just weird. It just came around the corner.
And I see dead people. I do. So
tell us some of those stories, Angela.
Well, when I asked my husband if he saw it, and when he said yes, I saw that, it freaked me out because I'm used to it. But to have my husband actually see the same thing at the same time as me, it was pretty crazy.
That's incredible. Now, see, this leads me to believe that, is it possible that, did that car disappear as if it went off the road, or did it disappear?
Yeah, it went off the bridge. Yeah, it
disappeared off the bridge. So is it possible you were...
the barricade was.
Is it possible you were seeing something that was meant to lead you to resolve something for the people who had died in that car, saying, we died here, please help us? Was it a call for help from beyond the grave?
Well, I think it could have been, yes. Really. I mean, that's a tough question because obviously I didn't speak with the people. But I would have to say that it was a reenactment to show us something had happened there.
Something happened
it was
here.
such a shocker that we didn't really process it until we were about a mile down the road. I mean, we spoke about it as we were driving, but it's nothing I actually could have done for them.
I mean, of course, because it happened how long ago? I mean, it could have been decades earlier. It
was one of those old cars that had a trunk that you could open from the back, and then you could sit there. They had these. I've seen these type of cars. They actually had it was a rumble seat or whatever they called it.
Rumble seat.
And you see that was the type of car it was, and
because we thought it looked real, and then it kind of started to fade. And become less, I would say more permeable in the atmosphere, less solid as it drove off the side of the bridge. In my opinion, I
go back to Mark's original question too, and I'm wondering if this thing actually went off a bridge earlier on.
Yeah.
Perhaps there's some remnants down there that perhaps haven't been quite put to rest.
That's a really great question.
So you see, when I think it was last summer, I was talking about some of the ghost stories from Spooky Sudbury with a colleague around a campfire, of course, and he was telling me stories on the way to his camp, and this is in southern Ontario, and it was repeated instances of people seeing a horse-drawn carriage coming down this deserted dirt road on the way to the camp. And the one night that he and his wife had both seen this, and they thought they were going to crash into it, and it disappeared just before it got to them. And it's the same. I mean, highways are such a strong place where people move from place to place.
Well, they're just constant souls. So many souls. Yeah.
And so it's as Packard comes from an era and a time, the horse-drawn carriage. I mean, these are things that obviously aren't driving around on the highways today, and yet they're still there, making their impressions known to people who are, more in tune with being able to pick up on these vibes that are there.
Mark, do you think it's possible that they could have gone through a portal and kind of a time thing, a time shift, a time phase?
No, it depends on your theory of what time really is.
Yeah.
Is time linear, or does it all exist at the same time, and we're only seeing
like
what's
a circle.
happening?
To tell you the truth, it felt like a big sphere, in my opinion, and I'm often in tune with that. I do see dead people. I haven't seen a lot of them in Lake Tahoe, although I did see the guy. What was
lumberjack.
It? Yeah, the lumberjack. I saw a lumberjack. But anyway, so I wonder if it was just so strong, this particular message that you're now mentioning. There may have been a message that my husband was able to see it too, because usually I'm the one talking about it, and then my husband's like, whatever, So this
well, I am an attorney, and so I question everything. So
he's not going to ask a question he doesn't know the answer to, Angela.
But it was there for both of us. He literally, and that was what was weird. Is I go, did you see that? And expecting him to say no, and so when he said yes, it was one of the freakiest moments, just because of the validation of somebody sitting next to me also seeing the same thing. So
let me throw this out to all of you, and I'll ask Mark first, and then I'll go to Angela, and then Bill. I'm trying to figure out why it's always in a remote area that we see these things along the highway. I mean, there's many deaths that occur at intersections and highways in city urban centers, but we don't tend to see them. Do you think it's because there's so much energy and so much rush in major urban centers that it's just completely masked out?
Yeah, you're probably more distracted by everything else that you don't see these things that are there.
Maybe the focus is different too. Angela,
Well,
what do you think? Or Bill, go ahead.
Well, if you're driving on the 405 freeway in Los Angeles, you better be focused on the car in front of you and behind you, and next to you and behind you, and everything else. So, yeah, that makes all sense. Because we were out there. It was 11 o'clock in the evening, and there wasn't anybody out there. So it was dark, and there wasn't anyone on the road with us when we saw this.
How was the weather? I would
have to say you need to be focused in or somewhat tuned in on a regular basis because the distraction is so apparent these days. That it is a great point. And that's one of the things that we do on Revolution Radio is we try to encourage people to focus and do their own research and actually tune in instead of tune out and stop watching Kim Kardashian's behind, and this type of thing, and actually, pay attention to what's going on the planet.
Yeah.
And I think that has something to do with, the spiritual world as well. I'm very into the Mayan calendar and the harmonic convergence and the resonance with the surface of the planet, regarding, time and space and all this type of thing. So, I think it's very important to stay in tune in general, and I think that one of the reasons that my husband had not seen a lot of interaction with the paranormal was because he was very focused on being, the ever-present attorney, the that type of thing, which is, a compliment as well as a backhanded compliment, and that's it. I have no more comment.
Angela, I'd like
to live, Brent.
Oh, Angela, I want to get you to plug your show while you're on. Go ahead.
Oh, you're a doll. I'm on here on Studio B on Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, Monday through Friday, except for Wednesdays, because we have the fabulous Dr. Robin Felkov on Wednesdays at 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, which, can translate into any math that you need across the globe since we are global. And the show's called At This Moment. It's a 1-hour show, and basically I cover news that you won't pretty much hear on the regular, media, mainstream services. So I talk about some important things, I think, and that's it. So thanks very much. I'm your fluffer, Brent.
Hey, Brent, let me ask you.
And Mark, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well, Angela.
Let me ask Mark this one last question.
Ahead,
we'll get off the air. Brent had a very interesting guest on the other day, Bill Burns.
Last week. Amazing interview.
Amazing interview. And he was talking about the ghosts of the White House. Abraham Lincoln, to name who Winston Churchill had saw and said he's never going to sleep again in the Lincoln room or whatever. So I wanted to ask Mark, do you have any stories about the White House?
I don't have any stories about the White House, unfortunately. I mean, I'd love to get a ghost from the White House, the library in the White House for my next book. Get the ghost to come talk to us. No, I actually don't.
I'm sure Brent can fill you in on that, but it was very, very interesting where Abraham Lincoln had been seen by a number of people. And I just found that enthralling. So I was throwing it out there.
What I'm really surprised, because George Washington slept in so many places, I'm surprised we don't see his ghost sleeping in many places.
He was one of the ghosts. He said Bill Burns said he led the attack down the Little Round Top to attack the Confederates when they were coming up the hill, and that was the turning point of the Civil War at Gettysburg. And Civil
War wouldn't be Washington.
No, he was talking about George Washington's ghost leading Chamberlain's the main division down the slope to knock out the Confederates. So anyway, I threw that out at you.
Now, before we finish and get off the air and let you guys do your thing, Mark, do you have a website? And I know Brent's going to ask you that anyway, but I'm curious.
MarkLeslie.ca is my website.
Okay. The Canadian thing. Right.
Yeah, sorry, it's not .com, it's .ca. .com was taken by an American, unfortunately. So.
Oh, I see. So markleslie.ca.
Okay, let's make everybody happy in the States. Mark, you and I at the count of 3 are going to say about. Ready? 1, 2, 3, about. Don't make us come down there with our
What did you say,
sticks.
Anyway, it was nice meeting you, Mark. Brent, as always. And but anyway, I was interested to see if Mark had heard anything about the ghosts of the White House.
And I think we're just going to hit mute if you don't mind and tune in.
Oh no, stick around. And interestingly enough, Mark, you're going to laugh at this. I wanted to do a book on ghosts of the Parliament buildings here in Ottawa, and I couldn't get a single MP to relate any stories, yet they are plethora. But nobody wants to lend their name to associate with it. And I said, well, I'll give you an anonymity. And they said, oh, no, we're not going to talk about it.
I'm actually in the process of trying to write about the library of the Parliament buildings, which was the only thing that survived a fire that took down the Parliament buildings. Think about this. The one place in the building that has all the paper, the flammable materials, is the only place that survived.
Historical records and everything.
Why is that? What is magical or special about this library that it didn't burn? That should have been the first thing to burn. So, and I'm having difficulty getting information because I really think that would be a fascinating story to tell.
You let me know if you need some help with that, because I'm a stone's throw from Ottawa, and it's one of the things that has been on my mind for a long time. And I live in a city called Kingston, folks, which is the home of our founding father. He would be. Yeah, he would be our George Washington. His name is Sir John A. Macdonald, and you notice how he has a Sir in front of him because he was knighted by Queen Victoria.
Wait a second. Did John A. Macdonald not speak to his dead mother?
I don't know. No, you're thinking of another prime minister.
Mackenzie. Sorry, that was Mackenzie, not Macdonald. Sorry.
Yeah, and he used to have seances and everything. Yeah, he was an odd bird. Everybody thinks Canada's this normal utopian country. Oh no. Trust me, folks, we're just as messed up as the rest of the world. The only thing that saves us, I think, is the winter. It forces us in instead of out, so we don't cause as much trouble. Spooky Sudbury is the name of the book we're talking about tonight. Mark Leslie and Jenny Dellin have done a magnificent job bringing all kinds of lore and stories from UFO sightings, Bigfoot, and everything else. True tales of the eerie and unexplained. www.nightfrightshow.com. Click on tonight's guest book cover. And we're talking ghost stories. They don't have to be from Sudbury tonight, folks, or UFO sightings and Bigfoot. Give us a call, 310-421-4053. That's telephone. Easier way, Skype, Freedom Screen 2, FreedomScreen 2, the number 2, Freedom Screen 2. And you can tell us your stories, and you can ask Mark some questions. Let's go back to Mark. Mark, one of the things about Sudbury that I always loved was going along the Kingsway and ending up at Chapters, which is our version of Barnes & Noble's, folks. There's rock on either side. Do you think the rock that's so predominant there, and as I said before, folks, that's what we call our Canadian shield, may have something to do, some kind of gravitational pull or something that keeps the energy housed there?
Yeah, I think there's two distinct elements that have to do with the rock and the high concentration of nickel, and I think Michelle talks about that a little bit as well. Not just the water that may draw extraterrestrial intelligence to come to Sudbury, but the high concentration of nickel, because there's a richness in the ground. There's also a potential that there's elements from the ground that allow us, our minds, to see things that other people may not be able to see. That it has that effect, right? There's a combination of that. I think we would be remiss if we're talking. We mentioned Laurentian. You used to your radio show that you hosted from, at midnight in Laurentian University. The research of the God helmet.
That's right. Go ahead. I've
Dr.
had it on.
Persinger.
Yep, there you go.
You've had the God helmet on. So Dr. Persinger
yeah.
at Laurentian University is the foremost scholar about this phenomenon where he's able to get in touch with that part of our brain that when he triggers certain elements of the brain, and this is interesting, depending on how you are tuned in, what your belief system is, you either see angels or demons or aliens. And it is a fascinating thing. I mean, the chapter is called "The Old Hag Held Me Down While Aliens Abducted My God Helmet." I couldn't resist being a little tongue-in-cheek about that, because I'm sure people who listen to the show are familiar with the legends that originate in, when we talked about Oot Naboot from the east coast of Canada, the legends of the Old Hag. The legends of the Old Hag, where you wake up and you have sleep paralysis, and there's this pressure on your chest, and the legend is that the Old Hag is trying to take your breath, and she's sitting on your chest. And if anyone has ever woken up in the middle of the night with sleep paralysis, you either see the Old Hag, or you see some alien creature standing at the foot of your bed, or it's an angel, or a demon, some incredibly powerful presence that you feel in the room with you, and you are frozen, because biologically, when we sleep, when we're in REM sleep, our body produces a chemical that actually paralyzes us, so we don't hurt ourselves while we're sorting through the dreams and getting chased by monsters in our dreams and all of the things. You sometimes see a dog's legs kicking as it's chasing rabbits in its sleep.
Yes.
That very same chemical that causes a paralysis in us when we wake up in a certain way, when we're still paralyzed, is when we're caught between the dream world and reality, and that is when we're most susceptible to be able to see things that we might not normally see. And that was one of the more terrifying. That was one of the more terrifying elements from when I was doing research for the book. Was the God helmet and Dr. Persinger. Brent, you said you had the helmet on?
I did. There was a Discovery Channel special that was being shot on this very subject that we're speaking about tonight. And as Mark had mentioned, Dr. Michael Persinger has done incredible research at Laurentian University, snuggled way up north, but in the mountains, and there's lakes on all sides. There's even a beach for the students to go swimming at, although not in this weather.
Unless they've been at a party.
And then there's no holds barred, folks, in Sudbury once the kids have been at a party. So all that to say is he is trying to recreate, if you will, a paranormal experience in a lab setting so it could be studied. And Mark's exactly right. This God helmet is nothing more than a converted Ski-Doo helmet, or if you will, a football helmet with little electrodes on it, just small, minute little pulls of electricity, pulls of magnetism on your brain, so small that it probably wouldn't even register without special equipment. I think I would suspect that we had mentioned cell phones and smartphones before.
No more than a hairdryer, I guess. The electricity of a hairdryer.
Just a little tiny bit. And I've had this helmet on now. He wouldn't turn it on for me because apparently it has to be done in such strict conditions that he wouldn't allow it to be turned on. But I know people that have had this on and have gone through this experience, and they were terrified out of their wits. And it's just by manipulating the magnetism in the brain. Now, I know other people that have had it on and have experienced nothing. And again, this brings me back to what we talked about in the first hour. Is this something that certain people, do you think, Mark, are more susceptible to? Because, a great example is Angela, who's still with us, but her mic is muted. She's an intuitive. She feels things. She senses
She's in tune with things that most of the rest of us just either ignore or pay no attention to, or
she's in tune. Let me tell you. You had to bring us back in, Brent. Thank you very much.
Spoken by the man who knows.
I thought I was just out inches, and they pulled us back in.
Now, that last missive that was written in your Skype was written by my husband, not me. I have no idea, but he's talking about some drunk person.
Well, he was talking about the oppressive, the old hag on top of you, and you're waking up. So, anyway, it's just a little comment. No,
I have had that happen when I was when I was younger, having picked up a girl when I was drunk who was 100 pounds more than me. Very funny.
Oi!
Hey, it's Night Fright, folks. We go anywhere, baby. Nothing's off the scale.
I will get into it. I mean, I saw this Sunday, celebration at about 4 o'clock in the morning one day in South Central Los Angeles. I don't know if it's time for me to get into that right now, but I can share that at a different time. You know,
sure, go ahead if you can do a Reader's Digest version.
Yeah, I think so. So I'm dropping off. I was a manager of talent, and I'm dropping off a rapper after a recording session. We had traveled a ways, and I was in South Central Los Angeles. 2 strange events happened that night, but this particular one. So I drop him off at his friend's house. The friend ends up getting murdered about 2 months later by his girlfriend. I think he was cheating on her or something, and I believe his girlfriend murdered him. But I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden there's a river or like a stream, and there's all these people dressed in their Sunday best. I mean, and they're mostly black people, as that area is a very predominantly black, is a predominantly African American area. So you can tell that all these people have been killed in that area. And everyone's dressed in white and their Sunday best, and they're all strolling around, top hats, you name it, literally lace, everything. And there's about 40, and I don't know why I know the word 40, but I know that was 40. And I'm watching people cross the stream, and I'm standing by the stream, and people see me. They're acknowledging me, but they're not really talking to me. They're just saying that, wow, I see that you see that I'm here. And I'm literally watching these people just have and it was a Sunday. And so it was about 4 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday in Southern California and in South Central Los Angeles. And I have to tell you, it was very odd because I've been moved ever since I saw that particular situation, because I was crossing the line. I was on that stream, and I had people noticing that I was there, although they were continuing on their business, which was basically just a nice stroll in the park that day, whatever that place used to be. And I cannot explain the impact it had on me, but I was transdimensional in that particular area, which I don't know much about it. I haven't done a lot of study on it, but I do know when I'm being acknowledged by souls and spirits and that type of thing. And I have, of course, I've met, you had mentioned, Mark, that you said people either see demons or angels or ghosts or, other entities. I can't remember what the other aliens. I've seen them all, and in this particular instance, it was a bunch of people that had been probably deceased from that area that were really enjoying themselves on a Sunday morning, I have to tell you. So that's all.
Well, you had mentioned the number 40, and I just want to reiterate, in the Torah, the Jewish Bible, folks, which is the Gospels, isn't that funny? The Bible's Old Testament, the number 40 is very, very holy. I mean, yes. 40 days and 40 nights, Noah.
Yes.
Also, 40 years.
Yes, 40 means a very long time in the Bible.
Very long time, and it also represents a new covenant as well.
Wow.
I studied Torah.
Very interesting.
At the Montreal, not bad for a goy, eh?
Wow.
And so that's 40 has a very significant connotation to it as well. I'm going to throw this out here because it's Night Fright, baby. We go anywhere. Many people claim Jesus was not 33 years old when he was crucified. In fact, he was 40. And there's some significant work that has been done by many people, and it looks like there's a good chance he was probably 40 when he was crucified. In other words, ushering in a new covenant. So there's a subject for another night, and I'll try and get a guest on for that. Tonight we're speaking with Mark Leslie and his book Spooky Sudbury, folks. All the books that we have been discussing tonight, Campus Chills is another one, Haunted Hamilton, can be found at the www.nightfrightshow.com website. And I would urge you to get them all. There's no reason why you shouldn't, because if you're into this subject matter, you want to be creeped out in a safe environment at home in your comfy chair, as I do with the comforter up over my head until it's safe to look. That's what I do, folks, and I get a beverage of my choice going as well, and it's a wonderful way to entertain yourself and learn a lot about the history of this culture of ours, this human culture, that all these things that we all experience right across the world. This is a global experience, folks. Everybody sees UFOs. Everybody has a ghost story. Everybody's had a paranormal experience, even if it's as little as thinking of someone, and then all of a sudden that person's on the telephone. So that's out of the normal. That's paranormal, and that's what brings me to do this show, and I feel unites the world in yet another way. Mark, we've got a minute left. Is there anything you'd like to leave the folks with?
I just want to say, ghosts can be really, really scary, but they can also be touching as well. And I think Spooky Sudbury has some examples of a woman who lost her son, who is a minor, who has the privilege and pleasure after he's gone of watching his ghost out on the front step on next door in the house he used to live in, standing there and having a cigarette. That it is creepy and scary sometimes when we think about the things beyond this world that we know. But there's also things that touch us and move us. And a grandchild who never had the pleasure of meeting Grandpa, who's singing a song that Grandpa used to sing, completely out of the blue. It is a little bit eerie, but also so beautiful and heartwarming. And that's one of the things that I love most about sharing these kinds of stories, is the connectivity between people that this really allows.
Yeah, me too. That's why I love doing this show. It really does unite the world in a way that we haven't thought of yet, and perhaps if we can exploit that more than exploiting bullets and bombs, there will be peace sooner than we think. We're going to wrap up now, folks. Once again, our guest tonight has been Mark Leslie. His book, Spooky Sudbury, www.nightfrightshow.com. Thank you all for joining us. See you next week when we've got Reza Khalili on, who is a CIA covert spy in Iran. Explosive. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time.